Hello, Tel Aviv. It's an absolute privilege to be here today. I'm aware that in the audience there's a complete mixture of partners, customers who have been with Nutanix for some time, and some people where this is your first time with Nutanix. So what we're going to take you through today is a 101, so the basics of Nutanix, and then we'll move on to 201, where we're going to do some demonstrations and go a little bit deeper. But many of us have been to these IT conferences where things can be a bit boring. You get a bit bored of some of the slides and some of the tech. So what we thought we'd do to spice it up is tell Nutanix by analogy. So we're going to go on a little journey together from the iOS to C3PO out of Star Wars, and then finally to Google Nest as a way of telling the story about Nutanix. Are there any Star Wars fans out there, just out of interest? Normally in IT you get a good collection. Okay, I thought that would be the case. So let me talk a little bit about my family. My wife, she loves to reminisce. She loves to look back in time and tell stories about how things were, and then look forward in terms of vision and the future. And there's a picture here of my youngest daughter on her first day at primary school, and then her first day at secondary school. There's a picture of my oldest daughter who recently went to prom, and she dressed up, and we reminisced about the fact that when she was younger, she wanted to be a princess. And then I've put a picture of my dog there. I'm a Star Wars fan, as I've already alluded to. My dog's actually called Jedi. So yeah, Jedi is the name of my dog, and a little picture of him when he was little and then bigger. And what we do is we sit down with our children at the start of the year, and we start thinking about plans and the future and the vision of where we want to go. You'll be relieved to hear that we don't sit down with a dog and talk about his vision for life, just the children. But anyway, why am I telling this? Well, recently we had Nutanix's 10-year-old birthday. So we celebrated 10 years of Nutanix. And it gives us a chance to reminisce, to look back about why we started the company, what the purpose of the company is. So today we'll talk about that. What's the why of Nutanix? Why do we exist? What is it that we actually do? And where is it that we want to go in terms of vision? So let's start off by the why of Nutanix. Why do we exist? And if you look back 20 years ago when I started in IT, the experience that we had at work was better than the experience that we have at home. Now, 20 years later, the experience that my children have, my parents have of IT is often better than what one gets in the workplace. So we said, could you take some of the principles of consumer IT and apply it to the enterprise? And when you look at Apple and what they've achieved, when you look at iOS as their operating system, it really is remarkable. This retro picture back in time where you look at all those devices and the complexity that we used to have to manage in our private lives. I love the picture particularly of the Sony Walkman. Did anyone have a Sony Walkman? Yeah, quite a few of us. I remember taking it everywhere with me. I even remember once going for a run, and I held my Sony Walkman as I ran down, trying to keep the disc from flopping so you could still hear the music. You only try that a couple of times before you realize that won't work. You tell that story to my children, and they're going to go, Dad, that's madness. That's a long time ago. Because they're so used to the simplicity of iOS. They're used to going into settings to be able to deploy applications, to manage multiple clouds, to manage cost, all with a swipe of a finger. So Nutanix took this idea of this consumer-based software approach and introduced it to the enterprise. So let's think about other companies that have disrupted and displaced. In Silicon Valley, they always talk about disruption. Which market are you trying to disrupt? And then looking at which products you're trying to displace or replace. And Tesla is a fantastic example. You've seen perhaps their share price go up in recent times. And you look at, I read What Car magazine in the UK last week, and they were saying how good Tesla is. And it's not just the environmental impact of electric car, but it's also the simplicity of use. To be having a single pane of glass to manage everything. Just like iOS is a single interface to manage your entire stack on your phone, Tesla has done that for a screen. And it's that thinking of the single pane of glass that runs through everything Nutanix has done, from our history through to what we're trying to achieve now. Later on, we'll give you a demo of Prism. Prism is our single pane of glass. The design point is, rather than the complexity of the past, the complexity of some of our competitors who are trying to manage things through multiple different interfaces, all mashed together, the design of Nutanix is just to deliver that simplicity. So we come from this heritage of a thing called hyper-converged infrastructure, which is taking servers, storage, SAN, replacing it with clever software, and then putting it into this single pane of glass. But the question for us is, can we continue to make it really easy to use? I'll give you an example of how easy it is to use. We're hiring a lot of people in Nutanix at the moment, and part of that is we've got a graduate program. So we've got lots of 21-year-olds coming in to join the company. They're able to get used to using Prism within 2 hours, to the point that they can demonstrate it and run it. And that's the design point that we have for you as IT professionals, that you can really simply use our technology, and then you can use that for one place to do everything. So what does that mean? Well, hopefully it means that you're having a bit of fun with Nutanix, but you're getting time back. There's a story here of someone upgrading their Nutanix systems on a train, another person doing it in their Tesla. And my favorite story is someone who upgrades systems 38,000 feet in the air in an airplane. Suddenly, weekends are coming back to people. It's interesting because you sometimes get negative stories about this. I was recently traveling, and a customer came up to me and said, "It's brilliant, this simplicity of one click to do upgrades. But one complaint, I used to come in at the weekends to do upgrades, and I used to get paid overtime. And now you've taken away my overtime. I'm able to do it in my lunch break. It's really easy, so I'm losing money." But seriously, his managers were very happy. I've put a quote up here from a chap I know in Johannesburg Stock Exchange called Pravesh. And one of the things that Nutanix is passionate about is our culture being different to some of the legacy IT companies. You know, it's about you and when you want to buy, not about us and when we want to sell something to you. It's about trying to make your experience of using the technology good in terms of the interactions with us and the whole buying cycle. Now, things in IT will always go wrong, and one of the design points we've got is resiliency in the platform to cope with that. But if you do need to get through to support, a difference for you, Nutanix, is you immediately get through to third-line support. You don't have a first line and a second line, you get through to third line. And Pravesh was telling me that he in Johannesburg Stock Exchange had to phone someone who he knew in support in Nutanix, and he phoned him up, and the guy was in the Netherlands, and he was on his bicycle. He said, "Don't worry, Pravesh, I'll come back to you shortly." And very shortly after, Pravesh got a call from him on his mobile, and he was out of breath. And it wasn't the guy's shift, it was just that he wanted to sort out Johannesburg Stock Exchange problem. And he was out of breath and solved their problem, not on his shift. And Pravesh said to me, you know, that's why we love Nutanix, because of that focus on the customer. And we're fortunate enough to have 97% customer retention, 97% customer retention, and 90 NPS score, which stands for Net Promoter Score. Some of you are aware it goes from minus 100 to plus 100, and anything of the order of magnitude of 90 is amazing in the industry. So we've talked about the first reason why we exist as a company, which is that consumer-like experience. The second reason we exist comes back to some of our foundations. So one of our founders was from Google and was responsible for designing web-scale architectures in Google. Now at the time, their main competitor was Yahoo, and Yahoo was still using traditional three-tier architecture approach. So they had a server team, they had a storage team, they had a SAN team, and they were managing that complexity. Google at the time, it was costing them $1 to run their data centers when it was costing Yahoo $11. That's $1 to $11. And we've seen the history of those companies and how successful Google's been. So the idea for Nutanix was, could we take that web scale experience and apply it into the enterprise? And what that means is you save a bunch of cost. Typically, if you're running a 3-tier architecture with 5 people, it will normally be 1 to 2 people who would run Nutanix because of the design point of the simplicity. So the first reason we exist is be consumer-like software. The second reason we exist is kind of that web scale technology. The third reason is, could we take some of the principles of public cloud and apply it into the enterprise? So what's good about public cloud is it's very easy to use, it's very scalable, and theoretically you pay for what you use. So could we take those principles into our design? But when talking about a multi-cloud environment, which is the mission of Nutanix, we really advise people to think about cost, to think about TCO, total cost of ownership, about where you put your workloads. It's interesting to see some of the costs associated with public cloud when you're looking at the fact you don't have an SLA, you're having multiple zones, the cost of getting data out of the cloud, all can be incremental costs. You look at AWS's pricing model, and they've got 22 different versions. That's times by the amount of flavors you have of those versions, and then thinking about the different software applications you want to put on it. It means it's quite complicated to price. So one of the things we say to customers is, yes, we're completely pro a multi-cloud strategy, but do the maths. Do the maths on those hidden charges. You look at some of the low-cost airlines that come into the world, and they charge you for extra baggage, they charge you for extra for a bit more food. They're starting to charge by toilet paper and per sheet of toilet paper. No, I jest, but it's not getting quite that degree of magnitude. But the point is that you've got to just watch those costs and do the maths. So we've got this concept of how do you calculate and what workloads do you put in what places. And we think things have evolved. It's gone from a situation in the market where everyone had everything on-premise to people looking at what am I going to put off-premise, to an environment now where a lot of workloads are going off-premise and you're thinking about how do you get that balance. And on the cost scenario, one thing we would recommend is the kind of thinking like how I travel. I travel every week to a different country. If I'm in Johannesburg, I take an Uber. If I'm in London, I might take a taxi or an Uber or sometimes take a tube. When I am in my home office and I'm going to our nearest location, which is an hour and a quarter away drive, I take my own car. It wouldn't make economic sense for me to buy a car to be here in Tel Aviv for a week. Likewise, it wouldn't make economic sense for me to take a taxi to the office that's an hour and a quarter away. And it's the same for computing workloads. To do the TCO on what's going to be the most economically cheaper of where you put workloads. Typically, production workloads, we would recommend you keep that on-premise on Nutanix, and typically will be about half the charge of public cloud. It's about half the charge to deploy Nutanix. So what other things do we need to think about when thinking about multi-cloud environment? Well, security is one very important thing. I was with a major global bank a few weeks ago, and I was with the managing director of IT for that bank. And he was saying that since the Capital One outage on AWS, in terms of loss of data, they have had to add more people and more security steps that they have to go through in order to get applications approved to go in the public cloud. It's not saying that they're not going for public cloud strategy. One just has to think about which applications and the security implications if something happens, and that's a concern that I know a lot of customers do. So what we're trying to do in Nutanix is we're not a security company per se, but we do have standards about how we design stuff on-premise for an on-premise environment that you run in your own data centers. But our idea is that if we take those standards, and as we help you go into a multi-cloud environment, we apply them, it means you've got that consistency across the board. So what other things do we need to think about in multi-cloud world? Well, one is, where is the data going to sit? It's interesting, I live in the UK, and we've just gone through this painful process of Brexit. And without getting into the politics of Brexit, it's interesting talking to customers about data because of uncertainty of knowing about global interactions and data means that customers have been making decisions to keep data in certain geographies, in certain countries different to other ones. And if you look at some countries, like Germany particularly, they need that data on premise in Germany. So when you're looking at multi-cloud strategy, you have to think about which data do I want where in terms of countries. The other thing to think about is outsourcing. Now, I'm sure many companies in the room have had outsourcing contracts that you just want to get out of. You've done it originally, and when you did it, it was your mess for less. So you looked at it and thought, yeah, they're going to run this for me, it's going to be cheaper, and you've gone down that route. But sometimes those outsourced contracts hasn't delivered the innovation that you were hoping to happen during that process. And one caution is about the trip to public cloud. Once you get on it, sometimes it can be more expensive, but it also can be quite locked in. There's one particular company I know in the UK, they're a reference company for us. They went onto a public cloud environment expecting to spend 20,000 euros per month, and they ended up for that application stack spending 90,000 euros per month. And it was because of a lot of the hidden costs and a lot of how they'd done the calculations. It then took them 12 months to get those applications back off the cloud and onto premise. Now, we're not saying don't do the public cloud. We're just saying you've got to get that balance and look about what you put where and be aware of the difficulty getting off. My last company I worked for was a small software company in the UK, and we had built all our applications on AWS. The main company we were selling to was an aerospace company. And what they said is, Andrew, we would like to now get all the workloads you've got on AWS off and put it on Azure because we've just signed a big Microsoft agreement. Can you please do it for us? And we had some of the best architects, software engineers in Silicon Valley, and it was like, no, Mr. Customer, that's really complicated what you are asking us to do. The way those have been architected is going to be different. But what Nutanix is trying to do is trying to make this all easy, to make the journey to public cloud much more helpful for customers so that you can have the option to move between clouds. So what other considerations in a multi-cloud world does one need to take? Well, I've drawn this picture of spaghetti software to illustrate legacy applications. We know that cloud-native applications are easy to get in the public cloud. But lots of companies are struggling to get legacy applications into the public cloud. It needs a lot of re-architecting. And that's because of the quality of service that one gets on-premise. So what we're trying to do is the mission of can we suck that data from those legacy applications into a Nutanix environment using iOS, using AHV, and be able to then deliver that on any cloud environment, whether that's in your own data center or whether that's in the public cloud. That's the mission we're trying to do to address legacy applications as well as cloud native. So let me summarize in terms of the why that we existed as a company. Well, it was to deliver this consumer-like experience. It was to deliver web scale, add in the security, add in the great economics of Nutanix, and that delivered this platform which is iOS-like, but for the enterprise. But once you've delivered that platform, where do we go from there? And our vision is to go on a route of adding more applications, adding more features, delivering multi-cloud in the same way as what's happened to phones. In phones, you've had that original capacity from someone like Apple. You can do it all through settings, and then you just add on more apps. You add on more multi-cloud capability. But what's the problem with Apple? The problem with Apple is you're quite locked in. I've recently bought some Apple technology for the children, and it's expensive, and you've got no choice around the hardware. Whereas Android, you get the great software, and then you get a choice of hardware platforms. So we as a company originally came from this foundation of building something called NX. It's an appliance on Nutanix. It's still available today. But the journey that we've decided to go on is around choice. And what we believe is you as our customers do not want to be locked in. You don't want to be locked into cloud, and you do not want to be locked into hardware provider. So we've given choice of hardware provider, and we're doubling down in lots of ways. We've got a great partnership with Lenovo, we've got a new great partnership with HPE, but you as customers have got choice in terms of where you want to go from a hardware platform perspective. Likewise, we don't want you locked in on hypervisor. You can use any hypervisor on Nutanix, but if you want to go down a route of using AHV, which is our hypervisor, it doesn't cost you any money. It's part of the license agreement that you have. And now, well over 45% of our customers have pivoted onto AHV because they want to save the cost. It's being commoditized. So always in our thinking is we've delivered this platform, but we don't want you to be locked in. We want you to have choice in terms of your hardware, choice in terms of hypervisor. Let's go back to thinking about cars again. So we've talked about Tesla already, but how did Tesla continue to disrupt? So they went, well, we've done an electric car, we've got that nice iPad interface, but let's make showrooms different. So they had a different experience to that. Let's help how we do remote upgrades completely different and do that at distance. So the exam question for us is, how do we continue to disrupt and displace? Which technologies out there do we want to replace and make them easier to use and for a lower cost? So we've added in a feature, if you like, which is security, which is a chargeable feature within our platform if you want to go down the route of micro-segmentation. And by the way, this particular product is a lot cheaper than our main competitor out there. So you may want to have a think, if you're a Nutanix customer today, of could you add more levels of security onto your platform. You already use our platform today, but what about other forms of data? So you now have a capability to manage file data, manage object data, all from exactly the same Prism interface. Same single pane of glass, able to manage different types of data. By the way, if you're a customer today and you're using Nutanix and you know you've got a fair bit of storage you're underutilizing at the moment, what I've seen some customers do is actually I'm going to buy some file licenses and just manage some file data from the same environment. So that's something you might want to have a look at. How else can we disrupt? Well, one of the interesting things in IT is the role of the database administrator. I'm not sure if we have any database administrators in the room, but what they spend a lot of their time on is talking to the infrastructure team, thinking about the infrastructure side of things. And what we're trying to do is remove that pain from them. So the ability to provide database instances, again, from the single pane of glass, to manage the backup, to manage troubleshooting, to do copy data management, all from the Nutanix platform. Now, why is this important? This helps the DBA to be able to focus much more on the app and much less time on the below-the-line plumbing. Move away from thinking about infrastructure to how you're delivering the application. So some of you might want to think about databases and how you can run them through your Nutanix stack. Also, we've expanded to start thinking about desktop as a service, and that service can be provided in the cloud, if you want a cloud-based desktop as a service, or something on Nutanix premise. So where do we go from there? So we've delivered this environment that's a single pane of glass. We've added more features, but what about giving you more protection around your data? So one thing we announced recently is a partnership with Veeam and Haiku regarding using that single interface from Nutanix, same pane of glass, to be able to do backup. So you can now do backup from the same place. Very easy to enable. And what else do we do on capabilities? Well, let me introduce these two people to you. This is my mum and my dad. And this is them on their 50th wedding anniversary. And mum and dad are retired school teachers. Mum used to teach little children. Dad used to teach mathematics. And mum had an iPhone, and she recently bought an iPad, and she said, Andrew, could you please get my photos from my iPhone onto the iPad? And so being a very generous son, I paid the $1 per month to enable iCloud, and Mum was very happy that I'd managed to produce this miracle for her to have her photos on her iPhone and her iPad. Dad, meanwhile, he's a bit cautious about Big Brother and about data and anything to do with that, listening services. And Dad thinks that his photos are just on the iPhone and the iPad. He doesn't realize that a load of his photos are sitting on Apple's cloud out there. And that's what I love about the iCloud. It's the most invisible cloud computing you can see, because you can't see it. It's just being delivered invisibly. So one of the things that Nutanix now offers is that same iCloud experience for our customers. So an ability within, again, the same environment for you to have disaster recovery. So that disaster recovery is delivered as a service, but you can go in and you can have that delivered for you. Again, the same seamless single pane of glass. So to summarize, what does this look like? Well, you've now got ability to manage your virtual workloads, your bare metal workloads, and thinking about different types of data, and then backup and disaster recovery, all part of the same platform. So where should Nutanix go next? So we've delivered this choice dimension, firstly on the hypervisor, secondly on the hardware. But the third place to go is to try and think about what we can do more to help multi-cloud and how that will develop. We've already delivered an ability to application automation, so you can go into the platform, you can use an application control plane, you can build out blueprints of the apps, and then deliver some automation orchestration. But what's the next journey? Well, it starts to go from hard to very hard. We're pulling off the journey of hard in terms of application blueprints and how you move them. But the very hard is, can you drag and drop between clouds? And the reason this is really difficult is because Google use their set of APIs, and they just basically want you on Google and locked into Google. AWS, the same, but with different set of APIs. Microsoft, the same, different APIs. So therefore, it becomes very complicated for one to be able to move it. It's back to the example I gave you of my old aerospace client who said they wanted to move stuff from an AWS environment to a Azure environment. So what do you need to sort this out? Well, you need C3PO, okay? So stay with me on this, because C3PO, for the Star Wars fans, they're going, I know what you mean. But C3PO was this human cyborg relations droid, and what C3PO could do is speak 6 million forms of language. So I may be taking it too far, but thinking of Nutanix as trying to be this C3PO that talks to the different clouds, that can manage data, whether it's cloud native or legacy, that sucks it into the Nutanix iOS engine, that delivers the hypervisor in order to be able to manage those new VMs, but then ability to take those VMs and move them on-premise or into the cloud. So I know we've got a load of journalists in the room, and I don't want you writing Nutanix is the new C3PO, because the problem with C3PO is he moans a lot, and he's a little bit stupid in some of the films. And we're not going to be producing Nutanix in gold, just to reassure everybody. But you see the principles of where we're going, and later on you'll see a demonstration of clusters. Now, clusters is this first journey we're going to go on in terms of an ability to take your own AWS costing and billing. You pay for that bit yourself, but you have a portable license from Nutanix so you can seamlessly use it on-premise or off-premise. That will be announced later on in the year in terms of go-market, and we feel it's going to massively disrupt, because we've been on this journey to deliver a cloud orchestration engine, and if we can pull this off this year, then that's going to disrupt the market. And by the way, it's not a service delivered by third-party software. It's you using your own AWS credentials and the costs that you're spending there. Again, we think this will disrupt. So what does this mean? Well, the journey we've been on is you start by making infrastructure invisible. You then think about, can you make data centers invisible? And then you can make clouds invisible, and eventually computing becomes invisible. And we've used the analogy of the car a lot today. And if we think about that journey, the car's gone on from driver assistance through to more automation, through to self-driving as the end state. What does this mean for us in the world of IT? Well, for those of you who've still got three-tier architecture, it's starting to move in terms of enterprise cloud and what that looked like, and then the journey to multi-cloud, but then adding more AI and machine intelligence in, which gives you the picture of this automated data center. Let's just pivot a little bit for those of you who are IT directors and think about cost and how you pay for stuff. If you think about IT cost and how it's changed over time, I started my career in IBM, and we used to sell AS400s where you'd pay a cost for that. And then we said, it's going to be more sensible to lease them, and customers liked it, spread costs over time. And then we tried to do capacity on demand, and that was really hard and basically ended up being a finance wrap. But cloud computing sorts that out, theoretically, because you pay for what you use. And assuming you can get off in a simple way, and assuming the charges are acceptable, then the concept of cloud computing evolves that way. Think of our private lives. How do we spend money now? Well, the world has moved much more to subscription. If I look at my own life, I got burgled in my house about 3 years ago, and they stole my bicycles. My bicycles are my pride and joy. I love cycling at the weekend. And I went out and bought Nest, which has now been bought by Google, and I put 3 cameras in the house, did the thermostat. What I love about Nest is it's a one platform, or Google Nest as it's now called, and from there I can manage my Google assets, but I can also manage third party. So I use Philips for my lighting, and I can manage it from exactly the same place. But how I pay for it is the interesting thing. So I've bought some of the hardware, but I now pay for the software on a subscription basis. That means I'm not locked in. I can leave at any point. It's a monthly charge. If we now think about how software has or has not evolved over the years, a lot of the legacy companies, they're still stuck in these perpetual software charging models. What perpetual means is you take out a license agreement and it's forever. You're locked in forever, you're committed forever, and you charge then a maintenance period after period of time. The journey we're on at Nutanix is getting more and more granular. So if you buy Nutanix software today, you buy it on a subscription. You're not into one of those complex enterprise license agreements where you have to pay a big chunk of money on a regular basis. You feel you can't get out of it. You often end up having shelfware. You're often feeling you've got no capacity to negotiate. But subscription software is very much like us as consumers in terms of how it disrupts. An ability to be able to pay on a term basis. Now, fortunately, our customers tend to like Nutanix, and long may that continue. But if customers just want to do a year, and then after a year go, do you know what? I'm going to move to another provider, then they've got the choice of doing that. And over time, you'll see Nutanix get more and more granular into what we deliver. I've talked a lot today about capabilities. I've deliberately avoided product names. But once you have subscribed to the base platform, there's a bunch of products you can see listed on the right that deliver all these capabilities. So capabilities to manage file data, object data, to run desktops, to be able to have security embedded, to be able to have application automation with blueprints, to have that backup, to have that disaster recovery all delivered from one single pane of glass, and the nirvana of the journey we're on in terms of delivering that multi-cloud experience. So who does that help? Well, if you're a CIO in the room today, you've now got an ability to have infrastructure as invisible, have less people running it, moving to a situation of having cloud computing eventually invisible, which means that you can move up the stack. Moving up the stack means that you can focus on what actually matters, which is application delivery, which is addressing what every company needs to do to say, am I going to be displaced? Who is it that I can go and disrupt? Which money from other companies can I take away because I'm delivering the application stack? So Nutanix does everything below the line so that customers and CIOs can focus on above the line. And we do it on a subscription model so you don't feel that you're locked in. So for those of you who are customers today, thank you. And we hope that you will continue to go on the path of looking at more features and more apps from Nutanix on the journey towards multi-cloud and orchestration around that. For those of you who are new today, and perhaps this is the first time you've heard a story from Nutanix, the first place to start is looking at that 3-tier infrastructure and saying, can I move to a model where I can have a platform to automatically manage things? So that was the story of Nutanix from iOS to C3PO to Google Nest. And may Nutanix's force be with you all always. Thank you.